Caitlin Clark just blocked one of the most powerful voices in sports media, and the internet lost its mind. Dave Portnoy, the guy who built Barstool Sports into a digital empire with millions of followers, found himself on the wrong end of a social media shutdown by the WNBA's biggest star. One click, and she cut him off completely. No explanation, no public statement, just a digital door slammed in his face. But here's what makes this story way more interesting than your typical celebrity drama. This wasn't about a bad take on her game or criticism of her performance. This was personal. It involved the McCaffrey family, one of the most prominent families in football, and it hit dangerously close to home for Caitlin. We're talking about her boyfriend's family, former teammates, and relationships she's built over years, all suddenly dragged into the content machine. Most people saw the headlines and moved on. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. They didn't dig into what actually happened or why Caitlin made this move. But when you look closer, this block reveals something far more significant about how today's athletes are drawing lines in the sand, protecting what matters, and refusing to play by the old media rules. And Portnoy just found out the hard way that Caitlin Clark doesn't mess around when those lines get crossed. The news spread across social media like wildfire. Caitlin Clark had blocked Dave Portnoy, and people on both sides immediately picked their corners. Barstool fans couldn't believe their founder got shut out by a basketball player. WNBA supporters cheered Caitlin for setting boundaries. Sports media outlets scrambled to figure out what triggered such a definitive move from someone who usually keeps her personal life extremely private. Dave Portnoy isn't just some random podcaster with opinions. He's built Barstool Sports into a media juggernaut worth hundreds of millions, commands a loyal army of followers who hang on his every word, and has never been shy about inserting himself into sports controversies. He's gone toe-to-toe with NFL commissioners, called out leagues for hypocrisy, and built his brand on being unfiltered and unapologetic. Getting blocked by athletes isn't new for him, but this one felt different. Caitlin Clark doesn't do petty social media beef. She's not the type to subtweet rivals or engage in public back-and-forth drama. Her Instagram and Twitter feeds are carefully curated, mostly basketball highlights, sponsor content, and occasional glimpses into her personal life. When she blocks someone, it's not impulsive. It's intentional. It's a calculated decision that she's done weighing the pros and cons, and the cons won decisively. The timing made it even more fascinating. This happened right as Caitlin was navigating her second WNBA season, dealing with increased scrutiny on everything from her gameplay to her relationships to her future with the Indiana Fever. She's already the most talked about player in women's basketball history, breaking viewership records and carrying the league's popularity to unprecedented heights. Every move she makes gets analyzed from 1,000 different angles. So when she chose this particular moment to cut off Portnoy, it sent a message. This wasn't about basketball criticism or hot takes on her performance. Athletes deal with that constantly, and Caitlin's shown she can handle critique without getting defensive. This was about something more personal, something that crossed a boundary she'd clearly established in her mind. And that boundary had everything to do with the McCaffrey family, a controversy that most people completely missed while focusing on the block itself. What exactly did Portnoy say or do that pushed Caitlin to this point? That's where this story gets really interesting. To understand why this block matters, you need to understand the McCaffrey family connection and just how intertwined Caitlin's personal life has become with one of football's most famous dynasties. Connor McCaffrey, Caitlin's boyfriend and reportedly her fiancé, according to multiple sources, is the son of Iowa football coach Kirk Ferentz's longtime assistant. He played basketball and baseball at Iowa, which is how he and Caitlin met during their time as Hawkeyes. But the McCaffrey web extends way beyond just Connor. His brother Christian is one of the NFL's premier running backs, a Super Bowl champion with the San Francisco 49ers who's been in the spotlight for years. Another brother, Luke McCaffrey, plays quarterback and has bounced around college programs before landing in the NFL. Luke is married to Britt McCaffrey, and this is where things get really relevant to our story. Britt wasn't just some random person connected to the family. She played basketball at Iowa, overlapping with Caitlin during parts of their college careers. They were teammates, part of the same program, sharing locker rooms and bus rides, and all the bonding experiences that come with being student athletes together. By all accounts, they had a solid relationship during those years. So when you're Caitlin Clark, you're not just dating some guy. You're connected to an entire family that exists under constant media scrutiny. Christian's games get analyzed every Sunday. Luke's career moves make headlines. The family patriarch Ed McCaffrey had his own NFL career and now coaches. This isn't a family that flies under the radar. They're sports royalty, and that comes with intense public interest in everything they do. Caitlin's already dealing with being the most recognizable face in women's basketball. Now add in the McCaffrey connection, and suddenly her personal life becomes content for every sports outlet looking for clicks. Who she's dating, whether they're engaged, wedding speculation, family dynamics during holidays, all of it becomes fair game in the eyes of media personalities who see those relationships as just another story to monetize. And here's the thing about family. You can criticize Caitlin's game all day, and she'll probably just use it as motivation. But when you start dragging the people she cares about into your content, when you cross from sports commentary into personal territory involving her boyfriend's family, that's a completely different situation. That's when boundaries get enforced. So what exactly did Dave Portnoy do that earned him a permanent block from Caitlin Clark? The specific incident that triggered this response involved comments Portnoy made during one of his typical Barstool segments, where he was discussing the McCaffrey family in a way that Caitlin clearly felt crossed the line from sports commentary into inappropriate personal territory. Reports suggest that Portnoy made remarks that either directly involved Britt McCaffrey or touched on family dynamics in a way that felt invasive and disrespectful. Now, Portnoy's entire brand is built on being provocative, on saying things other media personalities won't say, on pushing boundaries for entertainment value. That's literally how Barstool became successful. Unfiltered takes, locker room humor, content that feels like friends talking without corporate media restrictions. But there's a difference between edgy sports commentary and actually disrespecting people's families. There's a line between criticizing an athlete's performance and making their personal relationships into content without any regard for how it affects real people. And based on Caitlin's reaction, Portnoy didn't just approach that line, he sprinted across it without looking back. The exact quotes haven't been fully documented across all platforms, likely because Portnoy himself may have walked back or deleted some of the content once the backlash started building. That's often how these situations unfold. Something gets said during a live stream or podcast. Clips circulate on social media. The subject responds by blocking or calling it out, and then the original content becomes harder to find as damage control kicks in. What we know for certain is that it involved the McCaffrey family in some capacity, that it was significant enough for Caitlin to take the nuclear option of a complete block, and that it represented exactly the kind of media behavior that athletes are increasingly refusing to tolerate. Caitlin didn't ask for a correction or send a private message expressing disappointment. She just cut him off entirely. Think about what that communicates. It says, "You don't get access to my content anymore. You don't get to comment on my posts. You don't get to use my name or image to drive traffic to your platforms." In the attention economy of social media, that's one of the most powerful moves an athlete can make. And for someone like Portnoy, whose entire business model depends on being part of every major sports conversation, getting blocked by the WNBA's biggest star is more than just personal rejection. It's a professional statement. This wasn't Caitlin's first rodeo with setting firm boundaries against media personalities who she felt violated her trust or invaded her personal space. The Portnoy block fits into a much larger pattern of how she's learned to navigate fame on her own terms, especially as the scrutiny around her life has intensified beyond anything women's basketball has ever seen before. Remember the situation with beat reporter Scott Agnes that surfaced around the same time? Body language at a Final Four game suggested serious tension between them, the kind of cold recognition that tells you a professional relationship has deteriorated beyond repair. Agnes covers the Indiana Fever extensively, so they're in the same spaces constantly, yet there's clearly distance there that didn't exist by accident. Then there's the selective nature of Caitlyn's media availability. She does the required press conferences, fulfills her contractual obligations with sponsors and league partners, but she's extremely careful about who gets additional access. Not every reporter who requests an interview gets one. Not every media outlet that wants a feature story receives cooperation. She's learned that her time and her story have value, and she's not obligating herself to share either with people who haven't earned that trust. This approach represents a fundamental shift in athlete media dynamics, especially for women's basketball players who historically had to take whatever coverage they could get. For decades, female athletes were fighting just to be noticed, just to get their games broadcast, just to have reporters show up to their press conferences. The power dynamic was completely one-sided. Media determined who got coverage and who didn't, and athletes had very little leverage to push back. Caitlin Clark doesn't live in that world anymore. She's got leverage that women's basketball players have never had before. When she plays, ratings skyrocket. When she posts on social media, engagement goes through the roof. Brands pay premium rates to associate with her image. The WNBA's popularity surge is directly connected to her marketability and talent. She's not begging for coverage. She's choosing who deserves access. And that terrifies traditional sports media personalities who built their careers on the assumption that athletes need them more than they need athletes. Portnoy represents that old guard mentality, where media figures could say whatever they wanted about athletes and their families, knowing there would be no real consequences. Caitlin just showed him that calculation no longer applies. The Portnoy block matters because it represents something much bigger than one athlete cutting off one media personality. It's a statement about power, boundaries, and the changing relationship between athletes and the content creators who profit from talking about them. In the social media era, blocking someone isn't just personal, it's professional warfare. Think about how Dave Portnoy's business model actually works. Barstool generates revenue through attention. Every podcast, every blog post, every video segment is designed to drive engagement that translates into advertising dollars and merchandise sales. Sports controversies are content gold because they generate passionate responses from fans who either agree or vehemently disagree. The more buzz around a topic, the more valuable that content becomes. Caitlin Clark is one of the most valuable names in sports media right now. Any content featuring her name in the title gets clicked. Any debate about her performance or her personal life drives comment section activity. She's a traffic generator, which means media personalities have a financial incentive to keep talking about her whether she cooperates or not. By blocking Portnoy, Caitlin removes herself from his ecosystem. He can still talk about her. Obviously, you don't need someone's permission to discuss them on your platform. But the dynamic changes when the subject has publicly cut you off. It delegitimizes the commentary in a way that matters to audiences. It makes Portnoy look like the guy who got rejected, not the insider with special access and insight. The fan reaction split exactly along predictable lines. Barstool loyalists accused Caitlin of being too sensitive, of not being able to handle the rough and tumble world of sports media, of expecting special treatment because she's become famous. They argued that Portnoy was just doing what he always does, giving unfiltered opinions without corporate sanitization, and if she couldn't handle that, she shouldn't be in the public eye. On the other side, Caitlin's supporters and women's basketball fans celebrated the block as a necessary boundary. They pointed out that there's a difference between sports commentary and invasive personal attacks. They noted that male athletes rarely face the same level of scrutiny about their relationships and families. They argued that Caitlin has every right to decide who gets access to her platforms and who doesn't. Both sides missed the bigger point. This isn't about sensitivity or toughness. It's about control. Caitlin is asserting control over her narrative in ways that previous generations of athletes couldn't. Dave Portnoy's response to getting blocked was exactly what you'd expect from someone who's built a career on never backing down from conflict. He addressed it on Barstool Content, framing it as proof that Caitlin couldn't handle honest commentary, that she was trying to control media coverage by punishing anyone who didn't treat her with kid gloves. He positioned himself as the victim of an oversensitive athlete who wanted worship instead of real sports analysis. But here's what that response reveals. Portnoy fundamentally misunderstands why he got blocked. This wasn't about basketball criticism. Caitlin has proven repeatedly that she can handle people questioning her game, her shot selection, her defensive abilities, whatever. She's been dealing with doubters since high school, and she consistently uses criticism as fuel. This was about crossing into personal territory involving her family connections, and Portnoy either can't see that distinction or refuses to acknowledge it because it would undermine his victim narrative. Britt McCaffrey stayed completely silent on the situation publicly, which is probably the smartest move given how quickly these controversies spiral out of control. Getting involved would only add fuel to a fire that was already generating way too much heat. Whether she and Caitlin discussed the situation privately, whether there's any tension in the broader McCaffrey family circle because of this, that's all speculation. What's visible is that Britt chose not to make this her fight publicly. Connor McCaffrey also kept quiet, which makes sense given his position. He's not going to publicly defend his girlfriend against a media personality because that just extends the news cycle and creates more content for outlets to analyze. The best move is letting Caitlin handle her business while supporting her privately, and that appears to be exactly what happened. The broader sports media reaction was mixed but telling. Traditional journalists, especially those who cover women's basketball regularly, mostly sided with Caitlin's right to set boundaries. They understand that the relationship between beat reporters and athletes depends on mutual respect, and when that breaks down, athletes have every right to protect themselves. Meanwhile, the hot take economy of sports talk shows and debate programs saw this as perfect content. They could generate hours of programming arguing about whether Caitlin was justified, whether athletes are too sensitive now, whether media personalities should face consequences for controversial commentary. It was perfect rage bait material that guaranteed engagement regardless of which position you took. And ironically, all that coverage just proved Caitlin's point about why boundaries matter. What the Portnoy situation really exposes is a massive power shift that's been happening gradually in sports media, but is now impossible to ignore. Athletes, especially superstar athletes with massive personal followings, don't need traditional media the way they used to. They can build direct relationships with fans through social media, control their own narratives through personal content, and choose exactly which media personalities and outlets deserve access. Caitlin Clark has over 2 million Instagram followers. When she posts, she reaches her audience directly, without any media filter. She doesn't need Dave Portnoy or Barstool Sports to connect with fans. She doesn't need traditional sports journalists to tell her story. Those platforms need her more than she needs them, and that's a complete inversion of how athlete-media relationships worked for decades. Think about how this plays out practically. When Caitlin blocks someone, she's not just making a personal statement. She's removing that person's ability to engage with her content directly, to screenshot her posts for their own platforms, to tag her in ways that might drive traffic to their accounts. In the attention economy, that's a real penalty. It limits their ability to monetize her name and image. For media personalities who built careers on unlimited access to athletes, who remember when players had to sit through every interview request or face fines and suspensions, this new dynamic feels threatening. They see athletes setting boundaries and perceive it as hostility toward media rather than selective curation of professional relationships. But from Caitlin's perspective, why should she give her time and access to someone who disrespected her family? Why should she help build someone else's platform when they've shown they'll use that platform to invade her personal life? The transactional nature of modern media relationships means she can make those calculations without guilt. This is the new normal for superstar athletes, especially in women's sports, where the explosion of popularity is recent enough that players watched it happen. They saw how quickly things changed, how media coverage went from barely existing to invasive practically overnight. They learned in real time that fame comes with people trying to profit off every aspect of your life. So, they're setting boundaries earlier and more aggressively than previous generations did. They're blocking media personalities who cross lines. They're selective about interview requests. They're building their own media presence that doesn't depend on traditional gatekeepers. And media figures who can't adapt to that reality will keep finding themselves on the outside looking in. The Caitlin Clark and Dave Portnoy situation is about way more than one blocked account. It's a perfect snapshot of how the relationship between athletes and media is fundamentally changing, and how the athletes who understand their power are refusing to play by outdated rules that no longer serve them. Caitlin didn't owe Portnoy access. She didn't owe him an explanation. She identified behavior that crossed her boundaries, particularly regarding family connections she values, and she exercised the one tool social media gives everyone, the block button. Simple, clean, permanent. What makes this fascinating is how it challenges the assumption that athletes must tolerate whatever media personalities say about them and their families just because they're public figures. That's the old contract, and Caitlin just ripped it up. She's showing that in an era where athletes can build massive audiences independently, they get to choose who deserves their time and who doesn't. The backlash she received from certain corners proves exactly why she was right to set that boundary. If you can't respect someone enough to leave their family out of your content machine, you don't deserve access to their platform. And the fact that this even became controversial tells you everything about how desperately some media figures want to maintain power they're rapidly losing to the athletes themselves. Stay locked with my channel Simply Explained for more updates.